setting KPIs and goals, important for any startup. And obviously the amount of time you put into it depends on which stage you're in, but it's still early stage, extremely important. So what do you know about KPIs? Just quantitative metrics that indicate how well your business is doing. That could be a wide variety of things. So why do they matter? It's important to know about your KPIs because it provides a feedback mechanism for what your current strategy is. It allows you to see what's in front of you and see the impact that your decisions have made. And ultimately course correct. If you make a bad decision, the KPIs reflect that, and it makes you know it's a bad decision. So it also helps prioritize your time. Like Mo said, very eloquently put at the beginning of this session, a lot of entrepreneurs, they try to go in all different types of directions, and they're in this perpetual search for new things. So having KPIs, understanding what actually impacts your business, understanding what actually helps, can help you focus and ultimately prioritize your time. So what are the right metrics to set? First and foremost, there's primary metrics. This is your one God. This is that one thing that you look forward to and the one thing that will define how your company does. An easy way to look at it is that if you could bet your whole company on it, that's what you would do. So what is a good primary metric? So what you want is something that represents the delivery of real value. So how do users show that they're getting value? First and foremost is either with the dedication of their money or with the dedication of their time. You personally, you only give your time to things that you deem valuable. In the same way, you only give money to things you deem valuable. So another good idea for your primary metric is reoccurring value. So with a lot of monthly subscriptions nowadays or with return customers, you want to make sure that your actual product is targeting the same users again and again. There's no point in spending all this money to acquire a customer to have them just try your product and leave. So it also must be a lagging indicator. A lot of first errors that people make is by making something like email signups. It's very easy to funnel people into your landing page, have a bunch of email signups, but the issue is that email signups come before the customers actually get your value. And it's important to have an indicator that reflects the value that's been given to the customer, not their possible future possibility of value. On the other side of things, it shouldn't be too lagging. If you have something like monthly active users, you're not going to be able to fine-tune the decisions you make. Maybe you implement a new type of product or a new type of service, a new type of marketing deal, then monthly active users will reflect that in the occurring next month. And as a startup, you have to make sure that you're flexible enough to know what works and what doesn't, because you're burning cash all throughout. So at the end of the day, there's really only two to pick from, and that is revenue. So again, like I mentioned previously, nothing shows you're gaining value than people handing their money over to you. Depending on your business model, monthly recurring revenue is also really important. You want to make sure that your users are coming back, like I mentioned previously, and that they keep coming back. On the other side, active users is one that could be used. This is especially unique to examples where there is a prerequisite of building a large audience before you can start making revenue, or any industry with strong network effects. So when using active users, it's very important to define what an active user is. If you define an active user as somebody who just opens your website for 1 second and then boom, you have it as a statistics, that's not very useful. But if you define a certain, let's say your average use case is 15 minutes, so for a minimum, an active user must be there for 10 minutes, then that metric becomes a little bit more accurate. So people in hard tech and biotech are looking at us like, this is not applicable for us. Why am I here? Stop talking, Nico. And that is really true, but there's also some best practices to think about goals and metrics when you're in hard tech and biotech. So first, ask yourself, are you at a stage where you can sell your product? If you are, then just go back to the revenue metrics, people giving over their money, really good source of value. If you're not, then you have to think, first, if there's no regulation, do what Oliver said a couple sessions ago. You sell and then you build, right? You still look for revenue, but from pre-product sales. That A, shows that people actually want your product, and B, can fuel that motivation and those resources to go and develop it. When there is regulation, you have to step a little bit back and you have to think, what is between me and having my idea work? What can I do right now, actionable steps, to get it from now to the eventual future where revenue can be my primary metric. There are a couple of really good resources, both for hard tech and biotech. I'll send them into this like week's task list, so please give them a listen. Really good stuff. Secondary metrics are also something that's really important to do. There's a bunch of them: user retention, customer acquisition costs, revenue churn. We've covered some of these in our initial like lean canvas model, but it's good to have like 3 or 5 of these that you just keep and you monitor in the back, and it gives you like a good idea of like a 360-degree view of like what your business is. Remember that you can track them, but don't try to optimize all of them. This is coming back to why it's so important to have a primary metric. If you try to do everything at the same time, you're just gonna have analysis paralysis. Yeah. Classic paradox of choice. The more choices that you have, ultimately, the less performance, or in the case of this diagram, the less happiness. So what if you haven't launched? So when you haven't launched, again, you're not going to have that revenue metric to rely on, but it's important to know what problem you're solving to your customers, and kind of talk to your customers and understand, what do they want and what is stopping you from getting there. So as a quick task, just people shout out what their prime metric would be. I think with yours, active users makes a lot more sense than like revenue, but something like MoveMed, eventually when you're supplying that product, you're thinking monthly recurring revenue because they're paying for that like MoveMed as a service, no? But right now, because of the regulations, you have to step back and see like, how do I get from here to that? So we'll move on. Exactly. Start stacking them up. But ultimately, because of the regulations, it's tough for you. But I know you were having that conversation between like a medical device and a health app. And if you're in the situation of a health app, then you can focus on like pre-product sales, right? Because you know that it's just a matter of development, not a matter of does the NHS like me? Setting goals. So goals are really important as well. They're a little bit more broad, and they're really to define your success in the company. Again, I'll put this in the task list. Paul Graham talks about it very, very well here. He says that people start companies all the time, but they're not all startups. I think out of the 100% of people that start a company, maybe only 5% of those are startups. Because if you're opening a restaurant or a hot dog stand or a small shop where you sell like homemade clothes, if there isn't fast growth and if there isn't that possible future of scalability, there isn't a startup. And that's why startups fail so often. It's because the ambitions are so big that ultimately they don't work out that much. And that's why growth should be your normal one importance. Setting goals, again, your primary metric really compensates and like goes hand in hand with this, because revenue or active users shows that you're bringing something of value. And as we've been reiterating since the first lesson on a lean canvas, that's what ultimately matters. But step back and don't just try to hit those projected goals. See what is success for you. Every person's growth rate is different. And especially when you're coming maybe from hard tech, or when your customers are ultimately going to be physicians that have a lot of barriers to entry to understand and get to those customers, it's going to be very different growth rate than maybe MSG, where your user base is so big and you can reach a lot of people quickly. So what does being on track sound to you? And thinking about that ahead of time. I'm not talking about spending hours and hours a day making a scheduled plan, but understanding what you want to be, like in what position you want to be in the future, can help you strive for it. Some like general guidelines before we finish. First, paid versus organic users. This doesn't apply to everybody, but early on, it's very important to focus on organic users because it shows that, Paul Graham has said it multiple times before, word of mouth should be your primary method of getting your product out there, because it validates that you're solving a real problem, and it's free, which right now is a really important factor. And a quick anagram that you can use is SMART goals. Be specific, be clear what position you want to be. Make sure you can measure it. There's no point in making a goal that you don't know if you reach or not. Achievable, again, iterative steps like Mo said at the beginning. Relevant, and then time bound. Don't just say, eventually I'll reach this goal. You can fail goals, but it's important for you to have that accountability, especially when you're an entrepreneur. But yeah, brainstorm a goal. This will be like one of the tasks, so just keep it in your head. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.